How many of you have ever had the privilege of riding around in a horse and buggy? Anybody here? Yeah? Was it for fun, or was that the main mode of transport to get from A to B? Now, I grew up on the other side of the world where horse and buggies were still very, very common during the communist times of Romania. I've shared a little bit about that. Most people couldn't afford cars, and so in the little village where we lived, pretty much most people got around in a horse and buggy. Now, if you wanted to go from, let's say, a place like Bandura into the city in a horse and buggy, how long would that take? Well, you know what? If you had like a super horse and buggy, you might do it in 2 hours. But from here, about 20 kilometers to the city, you'd sort of maybe pack a little snack and you'd leave in the morning and you'd get there sort of mid-afternoon. And if you wanted to go from Melbourne to Sydney, you'd do what? I mean, you'd need 4 weeks of annual leave to get up there, right? It was slow. Life was simply slow. If you wanted to communicate with somebody, how did you get in touch with somebody? When was the last time you received a letter in the mail written by hand? When was the last time that happened to you? Can you remember? 20 years? At least 20 years. My family and I have a habit of trying to make people day. When we travel, we write them little postcards by hand. And people get them and say, oh, I haven't seen handwriting for yonks. But that's how you communicated. When my parents came to Australia and I was in Romania, they'd write a letter. It would travel by ship, and it would take somewhere between 2 to 3 months for a letter to get from A to B. News traveled slow. Everything was slow. It traveled as fast as a mailman's legs could carry him. But today we don't use horse and buggy, and we don't really write letters anymore. I saw a statistic that was saying if you want to connect with young people and really do something special for them, write them a letter by hand. Because I haven't seen it. It's novel. It's new. It's definitely something interesting. Today we have more gadgets, more bits and pieces, more things that measure our time. I've got something that measures my heart rate. If I trip over and I don't get up for 10 seconds, it sends a message to the ambulance to come and pick me up. We're more connected, more gadgets, more bits and pieces. And why do we have all these gadgets? Why do we have, telephones and smart watches and smart shoes and smart fridges that know what food has run out in the fridge and it orders it for you and gets Coles or Woolies to deliver it into your home? Have any of you got one of those fridges? No. They're out there. They're out there. It's coming. And you can watch TV on your fridge. You seen those ones? Yeah. Okay, those are a bit more common. Why do we have all of these devices? What's the advantage of having more and more gadgets and technology? Why do we build them? What are they supposed to do for us? Why do we buy better gadgets, better smart appliances? Why do we constantly want to have better technology? What is it supposed to do? How is it supposed to help us? More things like this, and we're able to have more. When was the last time you washed clothes by hand? Do you remember that? I remember that. Where I lived, we didn't even have electricity. And so washing was, once a week, Grandma would get the big tub and the grate. Any of you ever seen the grates? Yeah, you've seen them at museums, right? I grew up with one of those, and you'd grate some soap on there, so there'd be some soap on the thing, and then you'd sort of, grate your clothes on there. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? No. But now we have washing machines. What do washing machines do for us? They give us more time. That's why we have 1,000,001 gadgets, appliances, smart connected homes, to have more time. More time to do what? More time to work more so we can afford more devices that give us more time. Are you with me? We have more devices, more appliances, more technology that's supposed to make our life easier, and yet we are more tired, more anxious, more worried than any other society has ever been before us. Because if you want to break from work or even from, annoying relatives or from the news or from anything like that, can you really get away from it all? If you turn your phone off, Your spouse, your child, your neighbor, your friend probably won't. We just can't get away from it. We've invented a new word for the state of society today, a word that didn't exist several decades ago, a word that describes this constant rush and tiredness and anxiety and worry. What do we call that word? Stress. It's a word that simply did not exist before we had all these appliances and devices and technology. Stress, a state of continuous mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. If it took you a day to do 20 kilometers in a carriage, well, there was nothing you could do about that, could you? You just sat and you enjoyed, and what would you do for 10 hours on your way 20 kilometers? You'd have time to think. Would anyone bother you with emails or phone calls? No, nobody would bother you. If the city had burned down while you were on your way there, would you know about it? No. So the whole way through, you would be at peace. We don't have that luxury anymore. We're constantly connected. My phone wakes me up, my watch sends me messages and emails in the middle of the night letting me know that something is happening somewhere. Continuous strain. Now, stress is such an issue that health professionals tell us that there has been a 400% increase in compensation claims just in the last 20 years. We're spending more than $12 billion a year just on people who are stressed. It's the number one issue in the workplace. More than 50,000 people go to the hospital each year due to stress. At least half of us experience moderate to high levels of stress at least once weekly. And then what does all this lead to? Well, I'm not even going to bother reading the list, but pretty much every disease and symptom and issue and state of unwellness you can think of, health professionals are telling us, well, it's probably caused by stress. In fact, they tell us that 90% of all illnesses are stress-related. We wonder why we have better medicine, don't we? We have better technologies, better operating solutions, better technology in hospitals, and yet we are more sick. Because like never before, we are a society surrounded, inundated with stress. There's stress in the home. There's tension, whether it's finances or not keeping up with the Joneses or people contacting and connecting. When was the last time you tried to talk to a family member and you had to say, put the phone down? Has that ever happened to you? You're trying to have a conversation with someone and they're engaged or disconnected from real life and connected to something else? There's stress in the workplace. We have computers that are supposed to make our lives easier, and yet there's more tension, there's more anxiety, more workplace tension. God had a solution that He created and gave us right from the beginning to deal with stress, to put a break to this constant, ongoing tension. We travel back in time thousands of years ago, right to the beginning. The Bible tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it tells us that through successive days, God spoke things into existence. He starts by dazzling the world with light. Then He carpets it with verdure. He colors it with flowers. He fills it with animals. And then on the sixth day of creation, the Bible tells us that God doesn't speak things into existence. Up until this point, every time God made something, He said, let there be light, let there be flowers, let there be the sun, let there be something, and things just came into existence at His spoken word. But on the sixth day, He does something extra special. He doesn't just speak it into existence. The Bible tells us that He comes down to the earth and He starts playing in the sand pit. He starts to make a mold. It's starting to look like a human being, and eventually, after He's created this fantastic, exquisite mold, He kneels down and He does CPR. He breathes life into the first human being. God utters the following words, let us make man in our image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female, He created them. And so on the sixth day, God finished creation by crowning it with humanity, with Adam and Eve, with our great, great ancestors. And He looked and everything was good. Now, how tired do you think God was after 6 days? You think he gets too tired? Would you be worried if God ever got tired? What if he got tired and forgot to look after the universe for just a few seconds? The Bible says that God created, aside from Adam and Eve, aside from humans, everything else God spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. And he did all that in 6 days. And I'm sure and confident, and the Bible tells us that God does not get tired. 6 days, done and dusted. How many of you have 6 days in your weekly calendar? You look on your phone, you look on your computer, you look on... Do people still use paper diaries or paper calendars? Yes, a few people still do. Yep, okay. Whatever journal or diary or calendar you look at, there are not 6 days, but 7 days. God created the world in 6 days, yet we have 7 days. Where does the rhythm of 7 come from? Let's look a little bit at our world. Where do we get 24 hours from? Why do we have 24 hours in a day? Or why do we count a day? What helps us know when we've gone from one day to another? What needs to happen? Well, the sun rises and the sun sets, which tells us that what's happened? The world has spun on its own axis, and when it completes one revolution, when the globe spins completely from one point, comes all the way around again, we call that a day, right? So that makes sense. That's why we have days. Now, where do we get the months from? Well, month from moon. How do we know when a month has passed? Well, the moon has come full circle around the world. And it takes about roughly how long? Now I'm testing your physics skills. About 28 days, right? We have 28 days in some months, 30 leap years, we make it work. So we have a month in relation to the moon orbiting the earth. What about the year? Where do we get the year from? How do we know when another year has passed? Because you get birthday cards and candles? Well, that's how long it takes the world, our earth, to spin around the sun. And that all makes sense. That's how we measure time. But then you come to 7 in our weekly cycle, and it doesn't make sense. There is nothing in science, nothing in astronomy, nothing in the physical universe around us that gives us 7. And yet all of our calendars have 7 days in them. Why? Right back at the beginning, after God finished creating earth in 6 days, we find the following words. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. God finishes everything, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Because he's tired? The word rest here in Hebrew can mean that you rest because, you're flat out and you're out of steam, but it also means pause, to take a break from something. Not necessarily that you're absolutely exhausted and you need to sleep. So God pauses on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. And what does he do? Then God blessed the 7th day. Blessed is an interesting word. It's not a word that's commonly used in our language anymore. Now, Christians use it sometimes, but you go to your workplace and you don't hear people saying, well, I hope you're blessed, or have a blessed day. It's not a common word. And it means a whole lot of things. The most basic definition for blessed is a combination between joy and happy. So God made this a happy, a joyful occasion. He created a sense of happiness and joy around the day, and he sanctified it. We'll come back to this word in a minute. Why? Because in it, he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So what did God make on the 7th day? Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He made the heavens, the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, everything that we see, flowers, plants, animals, fish, birds, people. And then what did God create on the 7th day? He actually created the gift of... Could he have stopped at 6 days? He could have. He could have just said enough, 6 days, and then we'll go back to day 1 again. But God specifically created time in space. He didn't just pause, but he said, we're going to have one more day in the week, and we're going to make this an extra special day. It's a day of celebration. It's a day of joy. I'm creating time for you to be with me, for you to be with each other, for you to unwind, to stop, to break, to rest. It tells us that God sanctified the seventh day. What does sanctified mean? Well, let me give you an example. A young couple get married, and after the reception, they've had cake, and they're about to get into the limousine and drive away on their honeymoon. The new bride says, honey, just wait in the limousine for me. I just got to change, freshen up a little bit. I'll be back in 10 minutes. So he waits patiently in the limousine, and as he does, one of the bridesmaids comes to the door, hops in, and says, let's go. How do you think the young man is feeling right about now? Well, he takes a good look at her, and he says, well, she's a woman, and she's young, and there's nothing wrong with her. Well, might as well. I've had enough waiting. I mean, it's been more than 10 minutes. She said 10 minutes, and, you go with what you've got, right? Is that how it works? Does it make a difference which one he goes on his honeymoon with? Of course it does, because only one is sanctified. What does sanctified mean? It means only one is set apart. Only one is chosen for a special and a unique purpose. You drop your kids off at school, and then you come back after school and you pick up any two kids. I mean, you drop two off, you take two back, right? It doesn't make sense. Sanctified means that this is special. It's unique. You can't change it. There's no trade. You can't switch or substitute one for the other. As beautiful and as lovely as all seven ladies might be, only one is specifically set apart. And the Bible says that God set apart specifically the seventh day. It's a time to be together, a time of rest. It's a time to spend exploring and experiencing God. It's a time that God has given humanity to de-stress, to unwind, to take a break from the worries, from the troubles, from the trials of life. It's a time that God has given humanity. When God created Adam and Eve, there were no races, there were no nations, there were just humans. And when God made this world, the seventh day was given to humanity, not just to some people. It wasn't a gift for a few select or for a particular race. Thousands of years after creation, the story of the Bible finds us in the camp of the Israelites. Who were the Israelites? We refer to them more commonly today as the Jews. Who were they? Well, they were the descendants of a man by the name of Abraham. Here's a man that appears in the Bible who was loyal, who was faithful to the God of the Bible. God said about him, Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Who was Abraham? Well, God worked with humanity, giving them good principles to live by, good laws of love, of selflessness. Many people chose to ignore God's laws. Abraham was not one of them. He followed God's laws that were passed down from father to son, from Adam all the way down. And because Abraham was faithful, God made him a promise. In your seed, or in your descendants, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. Now, if you recall, in the days of primary school, for some of you it was a few weeks ago, for some of you it was maybe a few decades ago. If you remember in primary school, the teachers would use a particular strategy to encourage other children to behave. You've got a rowdy class, and there might be one or two children that are paying attention. What do? The teacher would often not spoil, but give extra special privileges to the obedient children. Why would they do that? Look at Jimmy. Look how quiet he is. Jimmy, you can go to lunch early. Jimmy, you can go have a drink. Jimmy, you can play with a Lego first. Do you remember teachers doing that? Why would they do that? What were they trying to do? Were they picking a favorite? Were they trying to disadvantage other children or something else? Well, what they were trying to do was show the other children that if they behave, they too would have privileges. Make the other kids jealous enough and maybe they too will respond and behave so they too can enjoy the benefits. And what God says to Abraham is, because you've been faithful, I'm going to use you and your descendants as an example. Not because I don't love the rest of the world, but I want them to see what happens when you follow my principles and my laws. When you listen to me, things will go well for you, and hopefully everybody will see how well things go, and what will they want to do? They'll want to listen as well. They'll want to follow as well. So Abraham's descendants, God leads them, he guides them. Almost 500 years after Abraham, we find one of his descendants, Moses, interacting with God. He's up on a mountain. God says to him, I want you to come here and I'm going to give you some laws, some principles, some commandments in writing so that people don't forget them. The same laws that Abraham had, the same laws that have been passed down from Adam all the way down, but that they'd lost in the process or hadn't observed as well. In those commandments, there's a specific one that takes the minds of the listeners back to creation. It's the fourth commandment. Before I get to that, what are some of the commandments that are there in the 10? Don't kill, steal, lie, cheat on your spouse, be jealous of others. There towards the end. Don't bow down to idols. They're commandments that largely have shaped at least Western society. The kind of freedoms that we have in Australia are based on those foundational 10 commandments. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now the other commandments say do this or don't do that. The fourth commandment doesn't say do this or don't do that. It starts with remember. Why would it start with remember? Because it'd been forgotten. God wasn't giving them a new commandment. God wasn't saying, hey, from now on, you guys need to keep the Sabbath holy. No, what God says is, you know what, this was my plan for humanity. In fact, I created an extra day in the week just for it to be something holy, something special. And so I want you to remember it. Don't forget that humanity was not created for 7 days of work. It was created to rest, to experience relationships on the seventh day. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Imagine you're at work. You're working really hard and you're pushed and stressed for time and you've got deadlines and you're worried about what the boss will think if you don't finish your job on time. And just when you're really tired and really worried about what your boss comes in and says, you know what? Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Wouldn't that be nice? God isn't trying to restrict us and say, well, I want you to give up a day. What God is saying is, I'm giving you permission. I'm giving you the freedom to really enjoy what I've created for you and for what I've wanted to experience with you. What does the word hallowed mean? Well, it's a combination of many things. Again, it's not a word that we use too often, but I like to think of it as, the best definition that I can come up with is hallow is to make extremely special. Right? So you go over to someone's house and they say, we're going to have a really special meal tonight. And you're really excited and you can't wait and you think this is going to be some 5-star gourmet meal. And what do you have? Cheese pizza. That's about as special as it comes, right? If you're under the age of 10, yes. Over the age of 10, and maybe cheese pizza isn't that special. What God says is this is much more than cheese pizza. Hallowed is, this is to be a unique celebration. It's to be a party. It's to be something memorable. Think of a wedding day and how special a wedding day is. God says this is something as exciting, if not more, every week for you to spend with me, with each other. It's a time to rest, to take a break from the worry, from the stress, from the pressures of life, and to celebrate, to enjoy together. You don't have to worry. What does it look like for my family and I? When Sabbath comes, something else goes. What goes? Sabbath comes, the emails go, the phone calls go, the worry goes. There are no deadlines and responsibilities. We spend Friday evening together. We always have extra special food on Sabbath. It's always a memorable day. I have a 6 and a 4. She just turned 7 3 days ago. A 7 and a 4-year-old. And you know what my 7-year-old said a few weeks ago? She said, Sabbath is the best day of the week. Why? Why do you think a child would say that? Because it's true. Because for her, Sabbath is the best day of the week. She gets daddy home, mostly. We get to be together. There's no noise, there's no distractions, nobody's cleaning, rushing, cooking, shopping, doing any of that sort of stuff. Sabbath is just family together. Friday evenings, we always have a special meal. We light candles. There's special extra dessert on Sabbath, on Friday evenings as well when we start our Sabbath. Saturday mornings, we spend time in fellowship, in church with our spiritual family, with our brothers and sisters that share the same faith as us. We get to support, to encourage, to be with each other. If we have lunch together, or if we don't have lunch together, we go home and have lunch with other friends that we invite over. Sabbath afternoons, on Saturday afternoons, we go out in nature. No emails, ignore the phone, don't have to worry about anything else. It's purely and simply no stress, no responsibilities, no deadlines, which is why my 7-year-old can say it's the best day of the week. And that's what God intended for the Sabbath to be. It was supposed to be so good that when you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, I wish I had another Sabbath. You know, it's supposed to be something to look forward to. It's to be the weekly highlight. Our children at home look forward to Sabbath because of all the special things they get and of all the special time that we have together with family and with friends. I'm going to talk about the Sabbath, though. Some people say the commandments. Sure, that's in the commandment, but I thought we don't really have to keep the commandments. Well, first of all, Sabbath was never intended to be a burden. And if people experience it as a burden, they've missed the point of the Sabbath. It's like someone giving you a free gift and you saying, let's make it real. Someone gives you a brand new iPhone XS Max and you look at them and say, oh, do I have to carry it home? How many people would say that? Oh, maybe you can carry it for me. It's a bit heavy. It doesn't make sense. So to complain or to argue, well, we don't have to keep the commandments, is to misunderstand the gift that God has given. In addition, Jesus talks about the commandments. He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. If you're my friend, if we're in a friendship and if we're in a relationship, well, we have boundaries and rules that help us have an even better relationship. A few months ago, we were in Italy, visiting family there, and we drove on these incredible mountain roads. Have any of you been to Europe and driven on some of these really narrow roads where you've got literally these perpendicular cliff faces up and then on the other side you drop down several hundred meters? The road is so slim, and I mean you can see that there. You can barely fit one car and you've got these little grooves where if you see another car come, you've got to go on the side. Now there were some roads in Italy like that where there were no barriers. How do you think you feel driving on those roads? 2 kids in the car, wife next to you. It's pretty much single lane. You see another vehicle, somehow, somewhere, you've got to figure out a way to overtake each other. Every single time you saw another car, you'd open the window and you'd bend your mirrors in, right? Because if you didn't, you'd lose your mirrors. And if you travel through some of these parts, every single car is scratched. They don't worry about the paint on their cars because there are times where you literally have to be so close that you're going to scratch. Now, there were some roads where there were no concrete barriers like this. How much fun do you think it is driving through there? Do you think I was having fun driving? There was no fun. It was stressful. We're doing 5 kilometers an hour. The locals are honking. Everybody thinks we're crazy, but I am not going faster, and I am hugging this wall, right? And if I'm driving on the wrong side of the road, right, because in Europe you drive, but if there was a car coming, no, you go around. You go on the cliff face. I am not getting close to the cliff face. But there were some roads where we had these protective barriers. How do you think you feel there? I had time to look out the window, right, to enjoy the scenery. My wife would say, look over there, and I'd be like, no. When the walls were there, I'd, slow down a little bit and look and admire, the snow-capped mountains there. The commandments are like this. They're not there to jail us in. They're not prison bars that protect us from having fun. They are barriers that save us from certain death. And the Sabbath is one of those that protects and saves us. We live in a society where people are on more antidepressants and more stress relief medication than ever before. And God says, I have a solution. You don't need those things. I have a much better way for you. We live in a society where 1 in 2 marriages ends up in divorce. We live in a society where parents and children just don't see eye to eye anymore. And God says the Sabbath is my barrier to protect you from all of these things. Time to be together, to talk, to reflect. How many families do you think stop every week and say, how was your week? How are we going as a family? What are some good things that are happening in your life? What can we do better? What do we need to do to support each other? There's just no time when you're on a 7-day cycle. But God says, break the cycle. You've got the Sabbath day to do all of those things, to unwind, to have undivided attention between each other, and to spend time with God as well. God says a few more things about the Sabbath as well. In another book of the Bible, in Ezekiel, he says, moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. The Sabbath is not only an incredible blessing, it's not an amazing gift of time that God has given us to make our lives better, not to detract, not to take away something from us, but to enhance our lives. In addition, God says the Sabbath is also a sign. It's a symbol that we're friends. It's a symbol that you trust me. It's a symbol that you accept me as God, because I'm the one that created this space in time. What's a symbol or a sign that lets the world know that a couple are married? How do you know when someone's married usually? Well, usually they're sitting next to their spouse. When they go, places are holding hands. But what if they're at work and their spouse is at home or somewhere else? Usually have a wedding ring, right? That's a very common sign. It's a symbol. Does the wedding ring make the relationship? No. But it's a symbol or a sign of loyalty, of affinity between those two people. Now imagine if a husband goes to work, and as soon as he gets into the office, surrounded by other women, he quickly takes his wedding ring off and leaves it there. When he goes out to restaurants, when he might go to a pub, when he goes out with other people, the wedding ring comes off. And then his wife happens to bump into him somewhere there, and he doesn't have his ring on. How do you think she'd feel? Is the ring affecting their marriage in any way? Well, the ring doesn't make a marriage. You just said that, right? But him taking it off could be interpreted as what? Him trying to tell others that he's not married. So even though marriages are not based on wedding rings, it's a powerful sign that shows a relationship. And so God says the Sabbath, in addition to all of the blessings, it's a symbol of friendship, of loyalty, of trust. When we come to the life of Jesus, and as you read and discover more about Jesus, you know that he wasn't someone who conformed to tradition. Jesus didn't do things just because everybody else did them. In fact, most things he did different to everybody else. Why? Because most people lived selfish lives, and he lived a selfless, loving life. But when we come to Jesus, we notice that there were some things that he did do. What did he do? So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Jesus didn't follow regular tradition. He didn't do what everybody else did. But the Sabbath, every single Sabbath, it's as it was his custom. He did this regularly. He embraced, appreciated, and enjoyed the Sabbath because, well, he created it. In fact, he said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Now, notice it doesn't say the Sabbath was made for Jews or for Indians or for Australians or for the Chinese. No, the Sabbath was made for man, for humanity, for all of us. God made it for us. What benefit does God get out of the Sabbath? Does he get tired? He doesn't get tired. He doesn't need to rest. Does he need it for anything? There's absolutely nothing he needs it for. It says it was made for mankind, a day of genuine disconnection from the hustle and bustle of life, a day of genuine connection with family, with friends, and with God. So it's good to have a day of rest. It's a blessing, it's a benefit. God made it for us, but God sanctified the Sabbath day. He made the seventh day special. How do we know which day the seventh day is? How can we trust the calendars? How do we know that the seventh day today, which is Saturday in our society, is the seventh day that God specifically set apart? Well, it's fascinating that we have evidence on time from 4 different sources where we can know with 100% accuracy that Saturday is the Sabbath day that God created from the beginning of time. We have evidence from the Bible, from languages, astronomy, and nature. And we're going to look at each one of those bit by bit. Well, in the Bible, God gave it to Adam and Eve, and he told them. How did Adam and Eve know which day the Sabbath day was? Because God just created them. Now you think about this. He creates them on Friday, and the very next day is a Sabbath. So their honeymoon starts on a Sabbath. That's how special the Sabbath is. It's as good as a honeymoon. So they knew which day the Sabbath was because God basically gave it to them. What about Abraham and other people in the Bible? Well, they knew because God told them, and they also inherited it from father to son all the way from Adam. How do our children know which one the seventh day is? How do our children know what the first, third, fifth day is? Well, we tell them. And so from generation to generation, all the way down to Abraham, they knew which day the Sabbath was. Then you get to Abraham's descendants, the Jews or the Israelites, and they had forgotten about the Sabbath. We read about their history. They were slaves for about 400 years in Egypt. The Egyptian nation had enslaved them, and you know what? In those times, slaves didn't really get a break. They didn't remember which day the seventh day was. When you're a slave, every day is the same. You wake up and you work, and you work, and you work, and you get to eat so that you can keep working, and when you just can't work anymore, you sleep so you can wake up the next day and repeat. Groundhog Day. So what does God do? Well, God gives them the commandments, and he says, remember the Sabbath day. And when he says to them, remember the seventh day to keep it holy, what question are they going to ask? Which one? Sure, we'll remember it, but which one is the seventh day? Well, why don't we start counting from today? No, God says you don't start counting from today because I actually set aside and made special just one day. What does he do? While they're traveling through the desert on their way to another nation, another country, God sends food from heaven. It's called manna. It's like, what do you call it? How many of you have ever had honey crunch cornflakes? The honey nut crunch cornflakes, have you seen those? Yeah, if you haven't, next time you go to the shop, look at that. The Bible describes it as a thin wafer that was sort of sweet. So I imagine it like honey crunch. So imagine you wake up in the morning and there's honey crunch all over. And what they would have to do is they would have to go and collect it, and then they would use that to cook and to bake. Every single day, this stuff is raining on them, and they use that as their main source of food while they're traveling through the desert where there isn't a lot of food. Now God told them 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none. Now, if this food falling was just a natural phenomenon like a river flowing, it would need to keep flowing. But God says, no, this isn't a natural phenomenon. I am sending you this manna or these white flakes. The word manna means, what is it? They woke up one morning, they see honey crunch cornflakes on the floor, and the first thing they say is, manna. What's that? Well, let's just call it, what's that? And they ate, what's that? Every day. But God did something supernatural. On the seventh day, because they didn't have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they didn't have names like that. They just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the seventh day, there was no manna on the floor. So they would come out of their tents and, hey, there was no food. God told them, well, on Friday or on the sixth day, there'll be twice as much. Gather as much as you need. Get it ready so that on Sabbath, you don't have to rush around collecting food and cooking. Now, if you're a guy, you think, well, what's the big deal with cooking, right? But if you spend a lot of time in the kitchen like my wife does, you think it's nice to have a break from the kitchen? God was giving everybody a break from the kitchen. And he says, no cooking on the Sabbath day, so you can actually rest and enjoy instead of being busy. And so the Israelites, the Jews, they come out on the seventh day and there's no food. What does that mean? That day is therefore the Sabbath day. Another 6 days, they collect their food every morning. Seventh day, they come out, there's no food. Now do that for 40 years and do you think you'll get a hint? Do you think you'll kind of stick eventually? You know, it's been 40 years. Well, sure, after 40 years, it stuck. And the Jews came up with a really clever way of naming the days of the week so that they would never forget. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. That's really creative, right? So instead of saying today is, Tuesday, they would say, well, today is day 3. But so special and significant was the Sabbath for them that day 6 had a different name. Day 6 was not called day 6. Day 6 was called the preparation day. Preparation for what? Preparation for the Sabbath. And when you have a party, you always prepare. Can you imagine it's Sunday morning and you're about to get married? And your bridesmaid says, well, how's your dress looking? And you say, well, why don't we go to, Chadstone and see what we can find? We've still got 2 hours to the wedding. How likely is that to happen? No. And if anyone did that, what does that tell you about how important the wedding is to them? Well, are you sure you should be getting married if this thing means nothing to you? The Sabbath was really to be a day of celebration. It was a joyful party occasion. And so Friday was when you prepared so that you could really enjoy the party on Sabbath. So the Jews never lost sight of this because for 40 years they got the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, preparation, Sabbath. Again and again and again. And the Jews, a nation of millions of people, passed that culture down from father to son for hundreds and thousands of years. The only way that could have been lost if all the Jews fell asleep into a coma for an indefinite amount of time and then woke up and forgot what day of the week it was, right? Did that ever happen? It never happened. There's no history that the entire Jewish nation went into a deep coma and forgot what day of the week it was. Then we come to the time of Jesus. We know that Jesus lived, he was crucified, and then he rose again. The Bible tells us the days on which this happened. That day, the day that he was crucified, killed, and died, that day was the preparation and the Sabbath drew near. So Jesus was killed on what we would call Friday, what the Jews call the preparation day. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. There are some of his followers, and they want to know where they're going to bury him, because they want to do some special things to his body. Some spices, some fragrances, because once a corpse starts to decompose, it doesn't smell nice. They wanted to do something special for him. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils. This is still on Friday, the preparation day, and they rested on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. Here are Jesus' most loyal followers, and so powerful and special is the Sabbath that even then, they don't rush back to the tomb the next day. They have a break. They take that time. They pause. They reflect, because that's what God had encouraged and instructed them to do. If Jesus had told them otherwise, if Jesus had changed something, if Jesus had said, the Sabbath isn't important, then his followers, his close ones especially, would have known. Now, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. Friday, Jesus is crucified and killed and dies. Saturday, Jesus' closest friends on Sabbath, they rest. The first day of the week, they didn't use the word Sunday, the first day of the week, they come back to bring the spices and the fragrances they had prepared. What do they find? But they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. So if we did a timeline, it looked like this. Preparation day is Friday, Sabbath is Saturday, and the first day of the week is Sunday. Jesus' followers adhered to this weekly structure. They celebrated the Sabbath even when they were sad that Jesus had died. And Jesus rose on the first day of the week. What about Sunday, though? There are so many people who say, well, Jesus did rise on the first day of the week. So let's celebrate that. Isn't that what his followers did? Well, the first day of the week is mentioned 8 times in the New Testament. This is during the life, death, resurrection, and afterwards of Jesus. It's mentioned 8 times, but never once does Jesus or any of Jesus' disciples say, well, you really should celebrate and keep Sunday or the first day of the week as special or as holy. Not one of those 8 instances. Nowhere in the Bible is anybody encouraged or instructed to obey, to keep, to celebrate any other day of the week except for Sabbath. If we truly want to remember Jesus, well, he did tell us how to remember him and how to celebrate what he did for us. He took bread, gave thanks, and broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, do this in remembrance of me. How do we remember and celebrate Jesus' life, death, and resurrection? Well, we call it the Lord's Supper or communion, where we have the bread and the wine, and we drink and eat those as a reminder of what Jesus has done for us. So if we want to celebrate, he's told us the best way to do that, how to really remember him. There's another way as well. We were buried with him through baptism into death, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father. The Bible talks about baptism as another way of expressing our desire to follow Jesus, to surrender our lives to him, and to celebrate what he's done for us. But just those 2 things. Nowhere are we encouraged or commanded or told to keep a day like Sunday or Friday or any other day of the week. So from the Bible, there is overwhelming evidence which one the 7th day is, and that no other day was sanctified, set apart, made special like that one. Now, when we come to languages, fascinatingly enough, across all cultures in the world, in more than 140 languages, the 7th day of the week is called Sabbath. It's actually called Sabbath. And that's not just Christian or Jewish cultures, but in all sorts of cultures. Where do you think they got that from? Why do you think in all of these, and this is just a few of them, I was in Italy and I walked past a shop. I was curious to know its opening hours, and it said, I don't remember the other word, but I remember Sabato. It was closed on Sabato. Closed on Sabbath. You see, from father to son, mother to daughter, for thousands of years, other cultures have held on to Sabbath. This is what Adam taught his children, and their children taught their children. And even when we had a plethora of languages develop, Sabbath was still kept. So we know which day is the day of rest. The Greenwich Observatory, which helps keep accurate track of time, tells us that the weekly cycle has not changed or been altered throughout known history. In other words, if you really want to know which one the 7th day Sabbath is, look it in your calendar, because nobody has ever changed the 7-day cycle. Now, some years ago, in the 16th century, there was a particular church leader, a pope, who did change the calendar. What had happened was there weren't enough days in the month, and they were falling behind the lunar and the solar cycles. And he said, we've got to speed up the calendar so that we can get back to where we were before. So what he does is he adds a few Well, he takes a few days off by going from Thursday to Friday and saying, well, today it's the 4th, tomorrow it's the 15th. It'd be really bad if you had your birthday in between those dates, right? No time to celebrate it. It wouldn't be so bad if your anniversary was there and you just happened to forget it. And it wasn't my fault. Yeah, the Pope changed the calendar. But what you'll notice is even though the numbers were changed, the weekly cycle was not changed. So Saturday was still Saturday, Sabbath, only the number of it, or the actual numerical date, was changed. Another really fascinating piece of evidence is from nature. Nature has all sorts of incredible rhythms. What's probably the most common rhythm to humans that we're aware of? What kind of rhythms do we operate on every single day? During the day we're awake, and at night we sleep. That's a very basic, natural rhythm. Try not sleep at night and sleep during the day. Does it ever feel as good? I've worked shift work, and some of you have worked shift work before. It is never as restful. You never enjoy life as much when you're working all night and sleeping during the day. There's another incredible rhythm in nature that we're just starting to discover and understand now, and it's called the circumseptan rhythm. Circa means about, and septan comes from the word 7. About 7 relating to the weekly cycle of 7 rhythm. What we're discovering is that nature revolves not just around a 24-hour cycle, not just around a seasonal cycle of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, but all of nature revolves around a 7-day cycle of growth, of rest, and regeneration. And whether it's the smallest microbes and bacteria in our bodies or the largest animals in the ocean, we're discovering that there is a built-in cycle of 7 in nature, just as we have a built-in cycle for sleep, for day and for night. How does this cycle work? Well, the way that they discovered this was noticing something unique in hospital patients. What they discovered is that if you went in for an operation on Saturday or the 7th day or Sabbath, and then came out of that operation on that day and then rested during that day, your recovery rates were much higher on the 7th day than any other day of the week. And they don't understand why. Why is it that on Saturday or Sabbath or the 7th day, you heal, you rest, you recover better? Is there any explanation for that? There's no lunar cycles, solar cycles, earthly cycles. It just doesn't make sense, but that's just the way it is. They're discovering the same for animals and for plant life. The 7th day is a day of regeneration. It's a day where we heal and we simply restore better. It's like sleep at night is better for us, right? If you look up sleep patterns, what they'll tell you is that it's good to sleep at least before midnight. Why? Because if you sleep before midnight, your body recovers better than if it sleeps after midnight. That's a proven, known scientific fact. That's right, if you're under 25 and still awake at midnight, science tells us you should go to bed earlier. Now, just as sleeping earlier means that we heal and we recover better, so too resting on Sabbath means that we regenerate better. So you could say, well, I'm going to take Wednesday off, but you know what your body says? You weren't created to take Wednesdays off. You were created to work on Wednesdays, and your body was created to rest on the 7th day. You weren't created to work at night. You were created to do what? Sleep at night. Now, could you sleep during the day? Yes. Is it going to be as refreshing and helpful? No. And the same with Sabbath as well. Now, the calendar, 7 days. Have we always had 7 days, and has everybody had 7 days? Everybody has had 7 days, and we have always had 7 days in the calendar, except for the French during the French Revolution. Now, I can understand that, because for a nation that eats snails for dinner and at a very exorbitant price, well, you can forgive them for experimenting with different things, right? And so during the French Revolution in the 1790s, the French said, you know what? We don't want anything to do with God anymore. We don't like God. We want to live independently. We hate God. They burnt down churches. They killed people who followed God. It was an absolute bloodbath. They erased God from society, destroyed the buildings, killed people who held on to faith in God, and they felt it was done and dusted. There was no trace of God in France until they realized something. There was a trace of God left in what? You see, the French were really clever. What do we use to measure distance? We use what? Meters, centimeters, millimeters, kilometers. How long have we been using meters and kilometers for? Since around the French Revolution, or a little bit before. What were we using before that? How are we measuring distance? The very precise foot. Which is fantastic if your foot is exactly 30.3 centimeters, right? How many of you have a perfect foot? Anybody here with a perfect foot? And so how accurate is it when you measure property you're about to sell and you happen to have small feet? Well, you can get into a serious dispute when you're selling 30 feet, but to someone else it's 40 feet or 20 feet. It wasn't very precise. So Napoleon, the French ruler at the time, said, we're moving to a decimal system. We're going to go to millimeters and centimeters and meters and, kilometers. And so he moved everything to 10. How did they weigh things before? In things like pounds, right? Remember that? But now we measure things in grams, kilograms, and tons. We go to a metric system with tons. So all of this was done by Napoleon and the French, and they moved everything to 10, which was supposed to make a lot more sense and it was easier to count. But what wasn't in 10? Well, the week, right? Everything else made some sense, but not the week. And they racked their brains and they said, where do we get 7 from? Why do we have 7 days in our week? And what answer did they come up with? Why do we have 7 days in our week? They looked through history, they looked at science, they read the encyclopedias and the dictionaries. Why do they have 7 days in the week? You know the only place they gave an answer to it was the Bible. And they said, we don't like the Bible and we don't like God, so you know what we're going to do? We are going to get rid of the Bible, we're going to get rid of God. They had this young woman and they said she was the goddess of reason. Everybody was following logic, smarts, cleverness. And we're going to go to how many days in our week? 10, because everything else is based on 10. How long do you think society lasted with 10 days? Officially, it lasted around 12 years before they changed the law and went back to how many days did they go back to? 7. But it was probably about 4 or 5 years until people just ignored it and just went back to 7 days. It just took Parliament another 6-7 years to catch up to it. Why? People could not thrive and survive on a 10-day week. They had to go back to 7. It was wearing them out, exhausting them. It just wasn't working. They went back to the way that God had created them. We travel throughout Earth's history, and right at creation, God created this incredible gift of time for us. He reminded us about it through the 10 Commandments. It wasn't a new commandment, but a reminder that God loved us enough to create extra time for us. It was something that Jesus experienced, and it was something that his disciples, his followers, long after he was gone, celebrated as well. John, the last follower of Jesus to live, wrote the last book, Revelation, and started with these words, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. John, 60 years after Jesus has returned to heaven, John is alive on an island that he's been jailed or exiled to, the island of Patmos. And he says, you know what? I was in the Spirit. What did that mean? He was praying, he was communing, he was spending time on what day? On the Lord's day. Now, of course, some people say, well, the Lord's day has to be the first day of the week or Sunday. But we don't get that from anywhere in the Bible. That's just tradition that people have made up. Jesus told us which day is the Lord's day. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The Lord's day is the one he created. He made it. It's a gift. It's an incredible time to celebrate, to rest, to enjoy. And it's a sign of allegiance, a sign of loyalty, a sign of friendship. We're reminded in the Bible, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth. The Lord has spoken. God has given us an incredible cure for stress, for family dysfunction, for worry, for anxiety, for the pressures that surround us. And he said, let this be a day to spend with me, with each other. Let this be a day to cure you from the pressure, from the stress, from the tension, from the anxiety and the worries of the week. Don't see it as a burden. If you see it as a burden, you've missed the whole point. Why don't you appreciate it? Why don't you enjoy it? Why don't you accept it as a gift I've given you? Why don't you start to celebrate, to enjoy an incredible gift that God has not just given us, but created us to enjoy? I believe we have a special item in a moment. Tomorrow morning, we're looking at a very interesting and controversial topic, and that's Mark of the Beast. Tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock? At 11 o'clock, we're meeting in the room over there. So if you'd like to know, what is the Mark of the Beast about? Is it a chip? Is it something that is written on someone's forehead? Is it a card? What is it? What does the Bible have to say about that? We're exploring that tomorrow morning. Looking forward to seeing you there. We have a special item, and then we're going to close in prayer.